Here at Trinity, we've been talking about several things, but for one, we are currently in a series of sermons that is titled Living into the Beatitudes, and these Beatitudes come from Jesus, which he gave on the Sermon on the Mount. And we've been unpacking these blessings, and what we're being reminded of every Sunday is this word, what does it mean to be blessed? And here at Trinity, we have defined this blessed word as God is for you, that God is with you, that at times things may seem hard and difficult in your life, but hold on, because God is going to bless you. God is going to affirm you. And these Beatitudes were given to a group of people, a community that was pretty much being told that God wasn't for them, that God wasn't with them, that the things that they were enduring or suffering with had been a consequence because of sin or something they did to displease God. And so we've been looking at these Beatitudes, and we're here at number 9. We're going to finish out next week, but this one this morning, as Becky gave for us, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are the peacemakers. These are heavy words for sure, because what does it truly mean to be a peacemaker? What does it mean to be a child of God? These are just a couple of questions we'll do our best to unpack, but I think the first question that we have to ask ourselves is ultimately, what is peace? Now, I would say for most of us, whether you're in this room or joining us online, when you hear that word, you probably have specific things that pop up into your brain that connect with peace, or that first thought or that image that comes to mind. One of those for me was a couple weeks ago, Samara and Samaya and I, we went out camping. And this is the first time we were going camping, because normally we do glamping. And so we usually stay in the log house and just kind of go and hike during the day. But this time we brought tents, we camped out by the fire for about 48 hours. We did get bit by a lot of bugs, but the goodness in all of that was the disconnecting from the busyness of the world. For those of you that have gone camping, you know what that feels like. Just to hear the sounds of nature, to look up at the stars in the sky and then watch the sun rise in the morning. There is an experience, an encounter with peace, calmness, and stillness. But again, peace can be more, because we can define it. A couple words that I looked up in the dictionary that define peace: a state of tranquility, harmony, or one that is really good, freedom from violence or conflict, which again would make sense, all these definitions, especially as we proclaim them here in a couple months in the holidays, peace on earth and goodwill towards human beings. But we're also realistic, because today in our society, in our community, in our world, it just seems more peaceless. We see war that is plaguing our world, our news, our social media feeds, politicians arguing, families that are being disrupted. And the question again, another one rises, is like, why is it so hard for us to truly live into this mandate, this blessing that Jesus gives, to live in peace with one another? And again, it's a question that I've been trying to just figure out all week. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, I think a couple of the reasons why it can be difficult is because we gravitate towards those who are most like us. We look for security and belonging by identifying with a particular group. For example, my family, my country, my ethnicity, my religion, my culture, my sports team. You should know that Alan and I are already in conflict, because he told me this morning, hey, how are you feeling when OU lost last night? So you see, we're already at odds here, right? But this dualistic thinking creates so much oppositional energy. I would say that our culture has taught us to divide our own worlds according to the people who are like us, like what we like, or believe what we believe. It is an instinct that is dividing by us versus them, with one hand pointing to the chest and another one holding a hand up like a stop sign. Our tendency towards opposition, I would say, is rooted somewhat in our biology, because our brains are more wired to readily trust someone who looks like us and be suspicious with those who are different, who have different beliefs, different facial features, skin tones, or certain political beliefs. But again, I have to believe in humanity here, Because as much as that can be an instinct for us, there's also the instinct for harmony. What if we could find ways to live beyond the divides? I mean, we imagine a world, right, where instead of taking sides, we seek somewhat common ground. What might greater peace look like in your closest relationships? Is this something that you desire? Is it something that we desire as beloved community? On his teaching on the hill, Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be children of God." Now, for context, real quick, it's important to know that actually those words were written in Greek by the authors, but Jesus didn't speak Greek. No, his primary language every day was Aramaic, but he did use this word peace in the context of the Hebrew word, which some of us are probably familiar with, shalom. And shalom has this meaning, which says wholeness, completeness, welfare. It means that everything is in a right relationship with everything else. Shalom is about putting things back together, made whole and made right. It speaks not only to the well-being of other individuals, but also the very well-being of our own bodies, our own minds, and our own souls. A New Testament professor, Margaret Ameyer, points out that in this beatitude, Jesus doesn't say, "Blessed are those who are peaceful wishers." No, but peacemakers. Peacemakers do more than just speak words. They find ways to make peace, shalom, a reality. Which again is different in how our culture defines it, right? Because for everything to be whole and be made in a right relationship, shalom demands. No, it actually requires wholeness and restoration, even justice. It requires a sense of action. You can't have shalom in this world, this kind of peace that is about relationship of others, when you ultimately have things that are ultimately holding you back. It's not just a special type of action, but it is a faithful action. As one writer puts it, it opens up a faucet that allows poison to run out of the soul. And that's really what's got to happen first, right? We can't make peace with poison in our soul. In other words, we can't make peace if revenge is in our heart. We can't make peace if bitterness is in our heart. We can't truly make peace, shalom, if we see the other as the enemy all the time. All of us know, I think, who are peacemakers and those who are conflict makers. Conflict makers, they like to harass, belittle, provoke, speak harmful language, and take advantage of those who are marginalized. They ignite anger. They live into the chaos. But some of us have seen those peacemakers in our lives, those peacemakers who have affirmed others, searched for common ground, extended the respect, and ultimately promoted noble ideas with a listening ear and an understanding. Jesus prompts us to search our souls this morning and ask ourselves, am I living into shalom? Am I living into this restorative peacemaking? One of my favorite human beings is Mahatma Gandhi. And he moved to India when he was 45, and he was immediately struck by the animosity between Hindus and Muslims. And he discerned his calling to be one of the overcoming hostilities and striving for peace among people of different faiths. He writes, each day when his community gathered for prayer, they read excerpts from the Hindu and Muslim scriptures, the Hebrew Bible as well, plus Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which begins with this beatitude. He took the heart, the words of Jesus, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be children of God." And the words of Jesus ultimately came later in the chapter in Matthew, which was the mandate to love enemies and pray for those who persecute you. After reading the scripture with these four world religions, his community sat in silence for 45 minutes, meditating on these words, listening for ways the ancient wisdom spoke to their own culture, to their own time. And they concluded with a hymn about an all-inclusive love that reconciles everyone, even enemies. Gandhi even wrote, "There will be no lasting peace on earth unless we learn not merely to tolerate, but to respect the others, in this case, respect the other faiths as our own." And as I read that story, I first thought, well, as a community, as we live into this peacemaking, would not each of us have a better chance of becoming a peacemaker if we spent more time in prayer focused on how we can become more respectful of others, mindful in prayer that is not ultimately about intending to change God's mind, but ultimately God changing us. As one of the crucial changes that must take place is this desire. I would even count it as a determination to become a peacemaker. To be a follower of Jesus, we must make that conscious decision to resist the tide of time that fosters conflict, strife, contention, and division. Instead, choosing, again, this challenging work of peacemaking to live in wholeness and restoration. So the question now needs to be asked, what are some steps for us to continue to take, that we can continue to take to become more peacemakers? Well, I think for one, we would do better at listening, especially listening to those people that we might disagree with. A couple years ago, I was going on a mission trip to Puerto Rico at the church where I previously served from. And I was really excited about this particular trip because I had never been on a mission trip with all adults. Primarily, I had been on a mission trip with youth and adult chaperones. But in this case, 9 of us, and I think 8 out of the 9 worked at this church. And as big as this church was, we didn't get to know everyone prior to that trip, and so we were going to spend a whole full week together. And one of them was a gentleman by the name of Doug. Doug worked down in our facilities department. And we flew out from Kansas City to North Carolina really early, so we got to North Carolina at the airport probably around 6 in the morning. Well, anyone knows that kind of morning, you need some coffee. So I told my group, I said, hey, I'm going to go find a Starbucks here. Doug went with me. We're in line, and we're seeing people come off the plane. And as we're in line, I noticed that someone who's pretty popular in the news feeds, Lester Holt, he's on NBC Nightly News. I saw him come out of the terminal, and I was like, oh, look. There's Lester Holt of NBC Nightly News. Doug was in front of me, and he turns around and he goes, well, who's that? And I said, well, he's a journalist, primarily in the evening for NBC Nightly News. Doug looked at me and he goes, oh, so you're one of those people. And I kind of was struck back. I was like, well, what do you mean by one of those people? Are you one of those liberals that watch NBC Nightly News? And I'm just like, oh. Okay, well, if I'm going to say yes, what does that make you? And he goes, make America great again, baby. And I'm just like, oh, okay. And all of a sudden, these images of judgment, of anger, of even resentment started flowing through my mind, thinking, I've got to spend a whole week with this guy. And who knows what he's going to do or what he's going to say. This is going to be the worst week of my life. And I'll tell you, Doug and I, to this day, are still really good friends. Doug and I, yes, we may see things differently, especially politically, but that week we chose to see the goodness in each other. That week we chose to listen and to understand and to seek out curiosity. And ultimately, we were a part of this amazing group that got to, and him and I actually got to install a toilet and a sink for a family that was in need. It was a beautiful week. That family not only impacted us, but Doug impacted me and my faith. To this day, again, we still text each other. I told him I was going to share this story this morning about how we came to a place of listening to one another. We came to a place of understanding one another. The other thing that we can do to continue to live into peacemaking is refusing the urge to seek revenge. Ooh, this is hard. Again, allow me to share an experience at the church where I previously served. We were assigned certain services, and mine was an evening service. And again, this was about 4 years ago, and it was before the pandemic hit. And there I was, meeting and greeting folks, and one of the volunteer security guards that was there, who knew me, came up to me, put his arm around me. And he said to these congregants, is Pastor Tino giving you trouble? And of course, at that point, you could tell he was saying it in a joking way. And they were like, oh, no, Pastor Tino's fine, yada, yada, yada. Again, this is 3 minutes before 5 o'clock service is starting. And he puts his arm around me and he goes, well, we know how all those Mexicans are down south causing trouble. And we don't want Tino to be causing any trouble up in here. And he pats me on the back and walks away. Service starts, and I am angry. I am embarrassed. I feel small. I feel like I want to go run out and go and hide somewhere. That wasn't the first time someone said something inappropriate to me like that, but I struggled and struggled. I even leaned over to the senior pastor when service was going on and said, I don't feel good. I need to go home. I remember going home. I didn't share it with my family, but what I did share it with, again, is in connection with prayer, that this would be the last time that I would remain silent. Now, again, what does shalom look like in the midst of conflict? What does shalom look like? Because for real, I did not want to be pastor in that moment. I didn't even want to think about even a word of having a restorative handshake or anything. I wanted to retaliate. I wanted to make sure that he was going to get fired, that he would never walk back into the walls of the church. But as that night I kept on wrestling that night with God, it kept on coming to me that if we just push this individual out, he still carries that narrative. He still carries that thought. And so I did meet with him. And I did ask him the questions. Do you believe that? Do you believe that all Mexicans are causing trouble down south? Do you believe me as a Mexican American is causing trouble here at this church? And he couldn't say a word. And again, I wasn't out to get him. I was out to understand. But I also recognize that you can't keep going on with this narrative. Let's talk. Let's do the work. It's hard work. It's challenging work. But again, I will tell you that him and I are good friends this day. He changed his narrative. He began to educate himself. He taught me a couple things, and we again sought out for the greater good of ourselves, for our community, for humanity. Listening to people, remaining true also to the work of peace and not seeking revenge. And lastly, I think one thing that we can do to continue to be peacemakers is remaining true to the values and the honesty and integrity that we hold of what we believe. Yes, this work is challenging. This work is hard. It can be exhausting at times. But at the same time, though, it's what we're called to be. Because that way, people will see that we are indeed children of God. That God longs for love, compassion, and grace and peace. Here in this community, we have folks that are branching out from Johnson County to up north and to Lee Summit to Olathe. This is what I love about this community because we're so spread out. But the question is how are we offering shalom not only in our families, but also in our communities? Peace will not come unless we are willing to take risks. Again, as I said, peacemaking is not easy. It can be exhausting. It can even be overwhelming. But we are invited this morning by this beatitude to give up the need to win, to be right all the time, and to step out of our own echo chambers. Yes, it takes that tenacious spirit to stay engaged across differences, to focus on commonalities, and to be humble and to be curious, to listen and to seek and to understand another's experience or perspective. Where there is difference or conflict, someone ultimately has to go first, having the courage to initiate the contact to attempt to seek peace. That is what this beatitude offers us this morning. 2,000 years later, where a community was oppressed, that was being overruled by an empire, and 2,000 years later, that beatitude still remains true for us today. Can we live into being children of God? Yes, knowing that we are uniquely and divinely made, but also offers so many unique and different gifts. Can we listen to one another and again reach past our differences, embracing one another as family, as one? Blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus says this morning for us, for they will see us. They will see us as children of God. Let's pray.